Good afternoon to all those who are joining in on our great webinar this afternoon. Thank you again for taking the time out in your busy schedules and all the things that you have in your life to grapple with to spend time to learn with us today and celebrate the legacy of Black educators in America with the Hunt Institute. Again, this marks an especially meaningful milestone for us at the Hunt Institute as we celebrate our 25th anniversary and really set forth now to carry forth the legacy of the late Governor James Hunt, whose lifelong commitment to public education was rooted in a simple but powerful belief that every single child, regardless of background or circumstance, deserves access to a high quality education, which brings so many of us to this call today. For 25 years, the Hunt Institute has worked in that spirit, supporting state leaders like Representative Waters on our call right now across the country with research, data, and nonpartisan dialogue focused squarely on student outcomes. So today's conversation, honoring the past, inspiring the future of Black educators and the future of American education, fits squarely within that legacy and the legacy of Governor Hunt. And as we think about our current landscape across the country, states, local school districts, we're all working to ensure that every child, regardless of race, ability, or zip code, has access to strong neighborhood schools with well-prepared teachers who truly understand and reflect the communities they serve. Research shows consistently that when students are taught by educators who have similar lived backgrounds or lived experiences, are less likely to be suspended, more likely to graduate from high school, and more likely to pursue education beyond high school. What's notable now in the current landscape is that this isn't a partisan issue. Our recent across the aisle data, which polls parents and likely voters from both sides of the aisle, led by our K-12 team. I know our director of K-12, Jaleel Hart, is on the call. His team did a great job of polling over 1,000 parents and likely voters, again, both sides of the aisle, around a host of education issues and things that are important to parents. And within that poll, 76% of overall respondents and 75% of parents specifically agree that every child deserves access to well-prepared teachers who reflect the student body they serve. And that level of agreement reinforces that this is not a partisan issue, but a student-centered one. And so with that in mind, today, we'll reflect on the enduring legacy of Black educators as we are in Black History Month, who not only built schools, expanded access, and strengthened communities, while also exploring how today's leaders, like those on the call today, are shaping policy and classroom practices to support all students and educators moving forward. And with that, I'm honored to be joined by two outstanding leaders today, Kurt Russell, the 2022 National Teacher of the Year, and South Carolina State Representative and the Executive Director of Teach for America, South Carolina, Representative Courtney Waters. Today, they bring a host of perspectives from this classroom to school board to the State House and on the national scale as well, helping us understand and connect lived experiences, policy, and practice in service of students every single day. And with that, I'll turn it over to our great panelists today to introduce themselves and answer this question from their perspectives. What's the legacy of Black educators and why that legacy matters for schools and students today? And so with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Waters to introduce herself and answer that question.
Thank you so much, Jarvis, and thank you to you and the Hunt Institute for having me here today. Thank you to everybody who took a moment to spend with us to talk about something that is incredibly meaningful to me, which is the legacy of Black educators. I'm Courtney Waters. I am a representative in the South Carolina House, and I represent Charleston County, specifically North Charleston. I actually get the privilege of also representing a Black settlement community, the town of Lincolnville, which is so interesting. Their municipal offices are housed inside of what was the only school in the community, which was a Rosenwald school. And so we think about the legacy and we think about this sort of Black settlement community where freed slaves went and set up shop and their descendants still run this town. The legacy of Black educators is incredibly important to me. I have the privilege of living in the Charleston area where just on Johns Island, a lot of data would show that some of the first organized schools for Black people in this country existed where I live, where I reside. And one of the reasons that I choose to serve in this area is because of that rich history that must not be forgotten. And I think right now, you know, the
And Kurt, you want to take it away while the representative is frozen. So
Yes,
Kurt,
I
why don't you take
was
it away?
most definitely. I was going to. Jarvis, thank you so much for allowing me to participate on this panel. Representative Waters, thank you so much. Very nice meeting you, and to the audience as well. I apologize with my voice. I'm coming down with a little cold. However, my name is Kurt Russell. I've been blessed to be selected the 2022 Ohio and also the 2022 National Teacher of the Year. I'm from a small town in Northeast Ohio, Oberlin. Many of you might have heard of Oberlin College, the first college to admit women, the first college to admit African Americans. And so I teach history. This is my 29th year in the classroom. And ironically, is the only profession that I ever wanted to be, a teacher. And so it's exciting to me to be on this particular call. What does Black educators mean to me and the legacy of that? Both of my parents grew up in segregated Alabama, Marengo County, and also Sumter County, a small town called Linden, Alabama, and a little country town where my father was born and raised that was called Quatobi, Alabama. And just growing up and listening to the stories of my parents and how the schoolhouse was their mecca and how the teachers represented positivity, excellence, a legacy that is unmatched. And from there, I recognize the importance of Black educators, the importance of making sure that resilience is being shown, that Black educators, there's a trust aspect to Black educators. There's a empowerment that Black educator exudes to their particular students and to the community. For so many years, Black educators have been the backbone of the Black community. And from there, that legacy is still within us, even in 2026. So, once again, I am so honored and so privileged to be on this call. And I will pass it back to Representative Waters, I believe, is back online.
am, and I apologize. I'm actually still trying to fix my Wi-Fi. Could we pass it to Alfred, please? I don't want to get interrupted again.
Yes, perfect. Absolutely. And then, yeah, go for it, Shivy.
Yeah, no, I just wanted thank you for pardoning my tardy because I was having technical difficulties over here working with public school Wi-Fi trying to get on. So thank you for your patience. I'm not can you restate the original question for me?
Absolutely. So, yeah, introducing yourself. And then for you, how would you describe the legacy of Black educators and why is that important today for both students and educators going broadly?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. First off, thank you all for inviting me to be here to join in with you. Mr. Russell, great to meet you. Representative Waters, great to meet you as well. My name is Alfred Shivy Brooks. I have the privilege of serving as a high school economics, personal finance, and ethnic studies teacher at Charles R. Drew High School in Riverdale, Georgia, which is just south of the city of Atlanta. I'm a city of Atlanta resident and I also have the honor of serving as the first active teacher to be elected to the Atlanta Public School Board in its 150-year history. Um, Education is a family business for me. My father is also a high school educator. He teaches in a neighboring district in DeKalb County and has taught my entire life. And I come from a family where 8 of my 12 aunts are all educators as well and had grandparents who were educators. So I try to run away from it and do other things fresh out of college and ended up right here in the classroom. And now when you Google black male educator, my picture comes up. So it's become like my identity and my personality, but it's something that I would never trade for anything in the world. Um, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I think we're all kind of well aware of like the statistics, especially around Black male educators, knowing that. And sorry, I'm still in school. So
please check the email that was sent by Ms. Johnson to release those students that are participating in signing day.
I'm sorry. So
starting with our signing date at this time.
The truth is that Black male educators are less than 1.6% of all educators. And we are grossly underrepresented in the field. You add on top of that educators who also entrepreneurialize, who also are thought leaders in the education space, that you become even more of a minority in the space. I think it's really important for my students to see people who look like them, who look aspirational to them, who look cool enough to want to be like them. It's important that they have access to those individuals. So it's been one of the things that has kept me in this field and doing this work. But I think it's something that gives me value beyond anything else that I've done in life, short of being a father.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Representative, we'll turn back over to you if you're all set.
I am not all set, but let's hope that Grace is with me right now. I'm not sure what the last thing you heard was, but I would say that for me, the legacy of Black teachers is just so evident around me, being someone who gets to represent in the great state of South Carolina, where over 40% of enslaved Africans entered this country, and where some of the first formal or informal schools were established on Johns Island. I also, as a state representative, have the privilege of having within my district the last Black settlement community where the descendants still manage the town, and the municipal offices are inside of the former elementary school, which was a Rosenwald school. And so the legacy of Black educators and the fact that Black folks started the first formal schools, period, is so resonant in everything that I do. And I chose, although I was born in Flint, Michigan, was raised most of my life in Memphis, Tennessee, I chose to stay in South Carolina and serve because I saw a history that was so strong and so rich that only gets to take center stage when people sit down at the tables in restaurants that want to serve their food, but is not honored within the culture in a real meaningful way. And so, Black educators make it all happen. Having started my career as a classroom teacher and then served on a school board, and then now I'm a mother of a child in school, and was very surprised and thrilled that my 6-year-old has a Black male as her first grade teacher right now, because he sets a different tone than the teachers that she has had previously. And it just means something different when you can go into a school and people actually appreciate your beauty, right? Like with my little girl who has curly hair, who is browner than I am, goes into a school and her teacher every day says, "How you doing, pretty girl?" Well, let me tell you what pretty girls do. They achieve, versus when she was in a Montessori school, when she was 3 and she was the speck in the classroom, and she would go in and nobody would compliment her. That says a lot to a child. It does a lot to establish how a child feels about themselves and how their confidence allows them to approach learning in a way that is helpful and facilitates more, versus something that makes them recoil because they've never been comfortable in the space that they're in. And so as a legislator, I'm privileged to have had those experiences and carry them with me. And I love and appreciate, Jarvis, I was trying to say before I froze the last time, how you grounded us in that data, that other people still understand that it's important that people see people who look like them as they're on their journeys to become who they are. Right? That data, that realization cuts through all of the nonsense and the rhetoric that I so often hear in the halls of the State House in South Carolina. But I bring my personal experience to the conversation as well.
Perfect. And then Kurt, as you think about that personal experience, and then Shivi as well, right? As you both of you're in school buildings, right? You're literally right now. So you have a different viewpoint, and Reverend Waters has also been in school buildings. She's been on the school board. So all three of you have this understanding. But for folks who are currently in and out of school buildings every day. Why is it important for legislators to understand the history and impact of Black educators when shaping policies that support all students, strengthen learning for all students, and reinforce schools as pillars of their communities?
Well, that's a great question. And the one thing, if I could just journey back in time a little bit, my first Black male teacher I ever had was Mr. Larry Thomas, my eighth grade math teacher at Langston Middle School. And I cannot tell you to this moment what Mr. Thomas taught me in math. I wasn't sure what geometry, algebra was the case, but the one thing I know for sure is how he made me feel, right? I think Representative Walters was touching upon that aspect of that cultural connection that Black male, Black teachers, period, have on their particular students. And a lot of times, what I would like to tell legislators is that policies sometimes shape systems, but we need to really focus on policies shaping livelihoods, right? And so it's not necessarily the systems that we need to shape. We need to shape livelihoods, and Black educators shape livelihoods. Mr. Thomas shaped me into becoming a teacher. The way he approached each and every lesson, the way he carried himself in the classroom, the way he greeted me, even the type of music he listened to, even the type of cars he drove, because it reminded me of my parents' cars, reminded me of my grandparents' car. So it's a cultural thing. And so we really need to look at policies and how it shaped the livelihood of young people each and every day. And changing our focus from being a system oriented into being a cultural, livelihood oriented policies that we need to shape and make.
Board member, what's your take, right? How do you see local leadership carrying the torch forward and making sure this stays a pertinent issue across the communities?
I appreciate this question a lot. As I'm a millennial. I tell my kids, I'm gonna be 42 next month, and of course my kids are responsible like, "Dang, you old." But in real life, thank you everybody on the call for shaking their head no to that. Right? I think my students are in the background going, "No, you're old still, Mr. Brooks. It doesn't matter." Right? Um, the they literally are looking at me calling me old right now. But the reality is, we millennials are probably one of the first generations of Black Americans who have had the opportunity to be audacious about who we are. And by that, I mean, we are one of the first generations that feel more called to our authenticity than we do to play respectability politics. And I feel it my responsibility to break the expectation of respectability politics, the expectation of code switching that has been pervasive. The reality is our students, when they walk into a school building, unfortunately, are not first seen for who they are, but first seen for how much of your authentic self can you turn off so that you could be credible or so you could be valid in this space. And so not only as a teacher do I have to make my classroom a safe space for my students to authentically be themselves, but also as a elected official, as a board member, I have a responsibility to make it safe for students who look like me, who look like my children, to be protected when they walk into the classroom. So like one of the first things that I did when I came onto our school board was pass the Crown Act in our dress code. Because in the state of Georgia, we can't get the Crown Act passed at the state level. So I can control what I can control. But by doing that, I'm making sure that no boy, no girl is told that they have to cut their hair to be on a wrestling team or cut their hair a certain kind of way to be a cheerleader, or that is not appropriate for one of our schools. That's important. But then you even look at the action that just happened last week on Friday, where our students decided to stand up against an oppressive system, an oppressive thing that they're seeing in news, that they're seeing in our communities today with regard to ICE. But I saw students being threatened with suspension. I saw students having their voices suppressed. So I now have a responsibility to carry and do something about it. So I'm introducing draft policy in APS next week that will allow students to participate in 2 civic actions per school year and have an excused absence, right? So like we have a responsibility not just to see the issues systemically that are happening, but to actually bring resolution for it and get something done about it. And so for me, that's what I see as my calling and how I try to show up to make a shift.
Perfect. Representative Waters, that's the perfect segue for you. Is someone who's been an educator, someone who's been a school board member as well, but also um, in the state house, right? But also the executive director of Teach for America here in South Carolina. And so you've run the gambit of roles and things that have impacted our education, our workforce, and also the students in the communities in which you have consistently served. So as you think about what Shivy's talking about, controlling what you control, what policies and things do you have in mind when as it relates to bringing more teachers of color, more Black teachers specifically, into our classrooms and retaining them?
Yeah. So it's interesting when you say what policies do I have in mind. I'm gonna back into at the end of what policies I don't have in mind that we're advancing in South Carolina that will discourage Black educators. But I want to first answer your question in the positive because I always want people to know that there are things we can do. We have a really hard time getting our Black teacher candidates to pass the praxis sometimes. And the reality is, I want to make sure no one hears that as a statement that Black people cannot pass the praxis, but for folks to understand that the history was that the praxis would be put in place to exclude Black people from getting into the classroom. And it is still doing that dirty work today, right? And so a couple of things from like my Teach for America perspective, we have a homegrown recruitment approach as a region, and we go into the, Claflin University, which is an HBCU here. We go into, schools like Francis Marion, which is a regional university, which a regional college where, folks who are from the PD, are going to go to Francis Marion to go to school. But it's not the USC, it's not the Clemson. You might not think to go there and recruit, but folks who live there are going to have a deep commitment to living in the rural areas, to building up the next generation of themselves and so forth. And we go into those places and we create pipelines and make people understand that this is an opportunity for you, that it's a leadership opportunity, because for one, we got to talk about education differently. And then the other thing is you have to pair that with this issue of the praxis. We really made some strides. We were talking before the call started. In 2022 or 2021, we had the first Black state teacher of the year, Dion Jameson, and shout out to him. I just love him dearly. But he actually did Teach for America because he could not pass the praxis, and so he could not do the traditional route. That got on the radar of our then state superintendent, and she actually authorized a pilot to see if we could create like a capstone project or some other evaluation system so that we could forego the praxis. Now, unfortunately, political headwinds changed. We have a new superintendent, doesn't want to hear that conversation, but we can push to eliminate barriers like that because data shows there's no correlation between the praxis and teacher success. And so we know that that's something that's keeping people out of the classroom. And we know data does not show that that needs to be a barrier or that's some sort of impediment to you becoming a successful teacher. Then we need to advocate, one, for policy changes like that. I think the other thing is, Black folk are tired of having to carry the water on all the social change and getting little in return. And so teacher pay is a real issue. And we've done a lot. I did a lot as a school board member to get the Charleston County, help get Charleston County on a path to increasing its teacher salary. South Carolina salaries are very low relative to Georgia and the places you guys live. But we did, at least in Charleston County, get us to $58,000 starting teacher salary, right? And across the state of South Carolina, they've been slowly adding, $2,000 here or there. But if we're not talking about ways to either offset costs for teachers, I think even some social programs, greater social access, like the benefits that the military receives, should be in place for teachers. If you're going to pay them less, let's make sure that cost is offset by them having more affordable groceries, childcare options that are affordable, and that we got to figure out how to put packages together. Because if you want to drive Black folk into these professions, but we also are the people who have to build up and get our families economically mobile, you got to pay people to do this stuff.
Jarvis, can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
Because I love what Representative Waters brought up, because that teacher compensation, people ask all the time, how do we get more Black men to teach? And I tell them, look, Black men are suffering from the same thing that women are suffering from in the field, and that's that we are undercompensated professionals, right? And the reality is teachers are undercompensated because America doesn't value the work of women. So if you look at any woman-dominated arena, whether it be a nurse, whether it be teaching, any pink-collar job, traditionally pink-collar job, is going to be undercompensated. And so I think we have to have a real come to Jesus about that. In Atlanta Public Schools, where I get to serve, I ran on getting our teachers starting salary to 65,000, right? And I think we were at 51,000 when I first got elected 2 years ago. Today we're at 63,000. For the 2 years that I've been on our school board, we have had 0 vacancies on day one. And all of our neighboring districts have had at least 100 vacancies. So I'd offer to you, there is no such thing as a teacher shortage. There's a teacher pay shortage. And so we have to do something about that. The other thing that you brought up, Representative Waters, was around standardized testing, right? Standardized testing. Well, and I don't know if folks are aware of the history of it, but standardized testing started in the military in 1917, right? And it was a test called the alpha beta test. And the purpose of the alpha beta test was specifically to keep Black officers from getting to certain levels within the military. Here's the gag. The SAT was created by the same people who created the alpha beta test. Standardized test has always been created to proverbially be the redlining within education, to keep certain segments of people from being able to ascend to certain opportunities. During COVID, I became very hopeful because we saw a lot of universities and colleges get rid of the requirement of ACT and SAT testing. And now you're starting to see folks kind of get back to that practice. But I'd offer to you, if we really want to get serious about advancing opportunities for folks in the way of education, we would abolish standardized testing.
And Jarvis, can I add something as well? Because what Mr. Brooks and what Representative Walters is really honing in on is that going back to policies is that it has to be intentional, right? So everything that I'm hearing is that the intentionality of teacher pay, the intentionality of standardized testing, it can't be artificial, right? So if we would like to move the needle towards having a more inclusive classrooms, more inclusive schools, that we have to be intentional about the work. Even be intentional about the courses that we offer. I teach, like I said, at Oberlin City Schools, and what I teach as my electives is considered taboo. I teach African American history. I teach a class called Black Music in the African Diaspora. I teach a class called Race, Gender, and Oppression. I teach a women's studies course, right? So it's intentionality. And the reason why I remain in the classroom for over 25 plus years is that the excitement of the curriculum draws me there. Intentionality, once again. And from there, students are drawn in. And so when students see themselves in the curriculum, they become more empowered and they become more apt to say, something special about this teaching profession. Maybe I would like to join it as well. Intentionality, I believe, is a buzzword that we need to make sure we put out in the atmosphere.
You just said something, and I'll toss this question to all of you. Intentionality, but also you talk about the perception, how we communicate things. Shivi, you created a video that has well over 2 million views at this point, went virals on all the major news channels and all over social media around the power of Black male educators. And we think about the ROI on things like teacher recruitment, teacher retention. We talk about teacher compensation. We think about appropriations and how we can find money, and that's a tricky conversation. But what you did, right, in a video that was very intentional is certainly, I think, a way that can help add and bring teachers to the fold, and also highlight the importance of issues that might not be talked about more broadly. So can you just talk about the impetus for that video? And then Representative and Kurt would love to hear your thoughts on the work that we can do in terms of the narratives around education as a no-cost way, or low-cost way, rather, to get more teachers in the classrooms and stay there as well. So yeah, it should be like, what was behind the video? What was your thought process behind it? And what were your intentions in doing a very successful video?
Yeah. It's funny. I would see these videos on like TikTok or Instagram where people be like, I'm dapping up the dimes, and they'd go and, at the party that they're at or wherever they were, and they give a pound to the people they found to be attractive. I actually was, I thought to myself, man, how cool would it be to highlight the fact that while Black men are less than 1.6% of all teachers, that at my school, about 40% of the teachers at my school are Black men. And we're traditional public school. We're not a private school. We're not a charter. We're just traditional public school in Riverdale, Georgia. If you know anything about Riverdale, Georgia, it's, one of the areas that has a lot of need, right? Um, by doing that, I was able to walk around my school and shake hands and dap up with almost 40 other Black men who teach alongside me every single day. And I think it was eye opening to the world. And it sparked a conversation where folks had to ask themselves, man, when is the first time I had a Black male teacher in my life? And for some people, it might not be until they get to the secondary level and they get to have a Mr. Russell up there, right? And taking some sociology class, right? But unfortunately, for many folks, they don't have the experience of having a Black male educator ever. And so I wanted to be able to showcase that. It's something that really, really resonated with folks. And, my take on things has always been, while we're living in a world that's trying to tell us, in fact, trying to make it illegal to teach Black history, right? When we're living in a world where state boards are taking away the accreditation of AP African American courses, right? Like when we're living in a world where we're being overtly and intentionally attacked, then I would live in a world and create a world where we would intentionally celebrate us. And so I continue to do that. In fact, every single day I show up to work, I try to get fired for doing the good trouble. And I feel like if I'm not pushing the envelope enough, then I'm not doing my job and I'm not exercising my privilege. So the reality for me is it's about showcasing the best of us. And in fact, you have me inspired because I started to do a new video today and I didn't do it. And now I feel compelled. Like, so tomorrow when I come back, I'm working on a new one. All right. And so when it comes out, Jarvis, you just understand that you were the impetus for why it happened.
We appreciate it. You're doing great work.
Yeah.
Definitely want that highlighted. Yeah, and Representative and Kurt, thoughts on that word of mouth as a tactic, that perception work as a tactic to recruit and retain more teachers.
Yes, I'm going to go back to Mr. Brooks. And Mr. Brooks, just want to tell you personally how you inspired me when I saw your video. It made me such a proud Black educator. So thank you, sir, for just highlighting, your colleagues and for that video. I truly do appreciate it. My good friend, the 2018 Rodney Robinson, the National Teacher of the Year, he made this comment before that really resonated with me. In the comment, it's quite simple. Why would someone go back to a scene of a crime? And so when we are talking about how can we encourage more Black educators, first of all, we have to really start with modeling. I come in similar to Mr. Brooks into our schools each and every day with excitement and joy of being a teacher, right? In front of the classroom, loving the profession. That's modeling success. That's modeling Black excellence within the classroom. And Rodney Robinson mentioned in that comment that for many years, young Black boys and girls have been suspended at a very high rate. And so, why would they go back to a scene of a crime? That scene is the classroom, is the school. Why would they go back if they have experienced trauma? It's been generational trauma for young Black students within our schools. And so, what we have to do by word of mouth, by our action, is to model the joy, to model the profession of being a teacher. And that's the greatest thing that we can do is modeling, role modeling, making sure that teachers see in their students themselves. See, I saw myself in Mr. Thomas, the first Black male I ever had. I saw myself in Mrs. Valentine, my language arts teacher at the high school. I saw myself in Mrs. Peak, my Spanish teacher at the high school. I saw myself in Mrs. Oliver, science teacher at the middle school, right? And so I had those role models that really brought intentionality within the classroom. And from there, I always wanted to take that trajectory of being the educator just like them because they showed me what it meant to be an excellent teacher.
Before I go to the representative, just want to know we have a few questions in the Q&A, so thank you for allowing for dropping those questions in there. After this next question or in response, we'll shift quickly over to Q&A. So if you do have any questions that are present and coming to mind, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to address them in the order that we receive them. So, Representative, as you think about your work in the State House to make sure you can pass policies. We know the tricky parts around appropriations when money gets involved and figure out where money can be allocated because it can only go to so many different things, and every single representative has things that they're extremely passionate about. And so we talked about the work around the perception of education. Are there other low cost or low hanging fruit that we can to rally around in terms of the policy levers to see more Black teachers in the classrooms?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when it comes to the overall increasing of the perception of the field of education, we also have to raise the level of professional designation to the profession. I don't know another profession where you have to hold your bladder all day if you can't get someone to step in your classroom just to go to the bathroom, right? And like you could simply put more paras and TAs in the classroom or in the building to be able to, free teachers up. I don't know spaces where professionals don't have designated time in mass to get together and share ideas and make each other better. I always tell folks when I was in the classroom, I felt like I walked in to that classroom and I was in an island unto myself. I had to manage the children, all that they came in with, myself. I had to figure out how to regroup, monitor and adjust when things weren't going right. And you actually need a moment sometimes to get with folks and really have that free flow exchange. And there are some districts that have made moves on this. There are some, charter systems, some schools that have enough autonomy who have made moves on this. But the truth is, we need more people who are skilled in the building to free up teachers and really treat teachers like the professionals that they are. I don't have to do my work alone. I get a team of people. I get people who are experts in this thing or that thing, and I get to also get together with my colleagues uninterrupted so that I can build my practice. Teachers don't get that opportunity. And when you see those sort of fringe benefits, those perks that folks get in other professions, and you look at the pay, you say, no, I'm not going to do that. And again, Black folk don't want to run toward it. And so a low cost thing is, if you try to figure out how to get additional bodies in the building who can handle some of these activities and really raise the level of execution of teachers, I think you will start to see a long-term shift in how kids see their teachers, right? Because kids see their teachers dealing with that stress. Kids hear their teachers complaining about what's happening, but you got to change the conditions. You can't just ask people to stop talking about what is true in their experience. You have to change the conditions so that long term, things take a shift. And I think that those are more low cost measures. I think also there's something to be said about keeping our hands off or taking our hands off of some of this more radical conversation that's entered classrooms. I alluded to this earlier, but, just this week, I'm in committee fighting a bill that's going to allow teachers to be sued for having conversations about religion, and sexual identity and those things. And folks, on the other side of the aisle think this is a good thing to do, that a teacher could be sued, that a school district could be sued because a parent was upset that the teacher or counselor did not tell them immediately that a child came to them with a problem. So not only is that not good for children, but what does that say to teachers or anyone who's thinking, I want to work with children? Well, it might actually send a signal to them that there's no safety in teaching anymore. And so I think there's also some things that we can just not do that are going to add costs to the system in ways that just have nothing to do with children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with that, we have a few questions in mind. one which I will get to on the top end, then I'll turn to the others, is a question around in a time of where conversations around DEI, race, representation are so polarizing, how can people continue to have this important conversation in a way that people receive it? From our perspective, the Hunt Institute, the data that we read on the onset suggests that there are clear issues when framed in a very specific way around student outcomes, that these things aren't polarizing, right? 76% of all voters, Republican and Democrat, 75% of all parents, Republican and Democrat, and everywhere in between, believe that we need more representative classrooms. That's an important issue to have schools that are in classrooms that are representative of the students in which they serve. So that's a quick tidbit there. But we also will make sure to share a resource that we developed late last summer that specifically highlights how to have these conversations in the current political climate that resonates across the political spectrum. So we'll share that out in our key takeaways in the next week or so. But we'll certainly turn over to our esteemed panelists to tap into that question if they feel it resonates with any of them.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in because this is something that I actually love to talk about because I think the answer, like, if the question is, how do we talk about it in a way that people receive it? There's a side of me that says, just keep having the conversations where it's safe to do so in the rawest forms. And I mean, like, talking about our history, talking about what has occurred and how we got here, because that's the thing that they want us to stop doing. But then there's also another side of the conversation that, you have to learn how to speak to power in the terms that they will understand. Folks who are in leadership understand data. They understand, and there are gaps. There are serious gaps that occur, particularly when we think about education. We, in South Carolina, well, I'll speak actually even more narrowly, not just South Carolina. When I was on the Charleston County School Board, when I first got on, only 18% of our Black children were reading on grade level. That's it. When you talk about issues and challenges that deal with Black children, but you ground every time in only 18% of our children are reading on grade level. Well, that was the fuel that I needed to push our district to set as a district-wide priority that Black and Brown children's reading levels would increase by, the next 5 years, which was sort of the term of the plan. I think that when you ground in like what is true and what is happening, then it removes people's resistance to having meaningful conversations if you say that you're here about children. But I do also believe that, this is a time when people need to go and have conversations in the quiet rooms, sort of the meetings before the meetings and the meetings after the meetings, because if you can sort of coalesce with the folks that you're situated around what the root of the issue is, and you don't have to sort of get roped into using certain terminology, I think you can really make great strides, because I think the effort is really to scare us away from talking about real issues and real challenges and to disempower us. But if we continue to talk about what the problem is as a result, right? Like, systemic racism exists, and so what? Well, so my children don't have access to XYZ. And so we're not going to go in and say systemic racism, but we're going to speak specifically about what the children at my neighborhood school don't have access to, that other children have access to. And that conversation is undeniable.
And Jarvis, as a classroom instructor, as I mentioned earlier, the courses that I teach, deals with race. And so I always believe the following, that it's criminal of me not to teach the truth. If there was a math teacher and the math teacher mentioned 5 plus 3 is 10, 5 plus 3 is 10, that is absolutely wrong. And that math teacher should be released from his or her job for saying that. And so how can I not humanize each and every student that walks into my classroom each and every day? And so as a history teacher, I must teach the information correctly. And when we teach information correctly, we will have those uncomfortable situations. But how can you grow? How can you grow when you remain comfortable? right? And so I tell my students all the time, yes, this is a safe space, but sometimes it's an uncomfortable space because we really have to look within us to see where we stand in regards to race or gender, um, economic oppression, all the above. And so we need to make sure, as Representative Walters mentioned, teach truth to power. Teach truth to power.
Um, America's greatest enemy is white supremacy. And we need to name it wherever we are and everywhere that we are. I think we get caught up getting distracted by whatever the acronym or coin term or whatever that device, that wedge device that has been utilized. Like, I mean, y'all remember when we were fighting about CRT? Now we fighting about DEI, right? Like, and the most sinister thing about white supremacy, especially in the world of education, is it doesn't require white people to be present for it to be present. And so there are many of us who have taken up the torch of white supremacy, and we self-censor, we self-sabotage, and we carry along the burden of this supremacist ideology, this supremacist delusion. And we force each other to fall under the hierarchy of it and to be in line. It's not called good trouble for no reason. And some of us, we get our degrees and we win our elections, or we get put in these certain positions, and we get real comfortable, and it becomes about our own financial protection. It becomes all about just our hut and not the village. So I will offer to folks is actually just have some courage. Have some courage. Because if we actually had some courage, then we would do the right thing regardless of whatever the consequences of it might be. And we would see that the consequences are not more important than the more fruitful, better, improved outcome for our people. I'm unafraid about that. And I think we all have to be unafraid about that, because so long as we continue to be tepid and fearful, we're going to remain exactly where we are.
You know, I would love to piggyback on that and just add one encouragement to do exactly what Chevy said and, you know, find your courage. I get more accolades in the environments that I'm in for being exactly who I am. And when I say being who I am, I don't just mean as a Black woman, but I mean as an educated Black woman who lived in the projects, who's the oldest of 5 kids, who brings people with me into the room. And so people can feel my passion, but they're also not hearing me water down or back down on any of these issues. And they come up and they say, you know what, I may disagree with you on everything, but you handle yourself. Like the thing is, you get respect. And you may not win the thing that you wanted to win every time, but I believe over time you win when people see that you don't capitulate under every circumstance and that you find a way to communicate your values and fight for your values despite what the environment is asking you to do.
Perfect. We have time for a couple more questions, so I'm going to string a couple of these together and really appreciate you all's authenticity and thought and passion in the last question. And so we have a couple questions and that tie around teacher retention and make sure educators feel supported. And so whether that's Black educators, you know, as we know, often being the only one in their school in some cases, feeling isolated, unsupported by colleagues, but also the district. What are things that school districts and school leaders and district leaders should be doing to ensure that Black educators are supported, encouraged to perform at high levels, and then ultimately are retained and stay in the profession long term?
Number one,
go ahead, Mr. Brooks.
Pay teachers a dignified, livable wage, a thriving wage, right? That's key parcel number one. The other thing to it is like, look, it's tough to be an educator, and especially when we think about like Black male educators, it's almost impossible to be a breadwinner and be a teacher at the same time. And so we're never going to answer for some of these deficits that we have around teacher retention and whatnot, so long as we don't value teachers enough to pay them the wage that they deserve. So I would just offer to folks, like, at the end of the day, for me, it comes to that. The other most important thing is this. The reason why we don't get the policies that we know would kind of push education forward is because we keep allowing people who have never done this work before to be the board members and the decision makers when it comes to education. That is the fact. So to all of my educators out there in the world, if you are upset about the policies that you're seeing around education, if you are upset about the working conditions you're seeing for it, if you are upset about the lack of compensation that you're seeing for it, go run for your local school board, because many of the issues that we have are not coming from Washington, D.C., and many times they're not even coming necessarily from the State House. They're coming from your own neighborhood, the people that you're at the gas station with, the people you're at the grocery store with, those people who are running for school boards, but they never worked in a school a day in their life and haven't been in a school except as a student. So we keep allowing, and we are the only profession where this is true. You will not go to a nursing board and see people on that nursing board who are not nurses. You will not go to a medical board and see people on that medical board who are not doctors. You won't go to a dental board and see people on that dental board who are not dentists. But you can go to any school board throughout this country and always see people who have never worked in this industry before, and almost very rarely see somebody who has ever been an educator before, and almost never see somebody who's in a school on the same day that they're going to that board meeting. So if you got a problem with what's going on in your board meetings, you got a problem with what's going on in your district, you need to run for office.
Mr. Brooks, I echo everything you said, from pay, and I would just like to add something else as well, is autonomy. Teachers are the experts. So you want to retain teachers, you have to treat teachers as though they are the experts. Give them some autonomy within the classroom. I have to show my privilege right now and say that the school district I work in provides that. And that's why this has been the only teaching job I ever had, is because my school district, Oberlin City Schools, gave me the autonomy to create courses that I saw fit for my students. Not necessarily for me, but for my students. Student centered, autonomy, mobility, but like Mr. Brooks mentioned, pay does not hurt at all. That
You muted yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. You treat them well and you pay them well. That's how you retain teachers.
That's right. And I would just add, and keep the affinity groups going, because we need to be able to go in our spaces and just have real conversations and vent and let loose without feeling like somebody's watching us, or we have to, tone police and all of those other things. And so in a moment where, folks are eliminating those things, at least in the state where I live, whether it's formal or informal, keep the affinity groups strong.
Perfect. We have time for one last question. I'm going to tie these two in. So Sumar and Trinise, bear with me as I try to work some magic in these questions. And so it's actually three in one, actually. And so when I was talking to Representative Waters before this, the webinar last week, we were talking about this idea of what like vision and what her vision was for education. So I'd love for each of you to talk about your vision for education. And then as you do that, as you think through any ways that we can incorporate community-centered practices in our classrooms, or thinking about, how we activate our students to be on school boards. I think Chevy just talked on that one. But just what's your vision for education as an educator, as parents, as leaders in the community? What's your vision for this long term?
Mine is so simple. It's really simple. My vision for education is to make sure that each and every student is humanized. Each and every student is humanized. So every student that walks through our buildings throughout this nation feel a sense of belonging and feel humanized. And how do we do that? We've been mentioning it throughout this presentation. You have to be authentic and you have to be intentional about that. And you have to recognize the gifts of each and every one of our students. I always brag about my kids. I have Black kids in my classroom. I have white kids in my classroom. I have kids on the spectrum, but every one of my kids is absolutely brilliant. Every single one is absolutely brilliant because they have a lived experience. And that lived experience needs to be applauded. It needs to be recognized. And we as educators, as a education community, need to recognize that and put students at the center of everything we do. So once again, simple answer for me, humanize every single student.
I love that that response. I would say for me that when it comes to the governance of education, there will be nothing about students or teachers without students or teachers at the table. For me, what that looks like is back in November, I passed a student board representative policy for APS. So we now have a active student within our district that comes from our student advisory council and it rotates. But we have an active student that serves on the dais during our board meetings. And we have an active student that serves in our policy committee during the policy committee meeting. So students are there helping to craft policy as well. The other thing is too, just getting more educators in the roles of governance. So yes, I was the first active teacher to be elected to the Atlanta Public School Board, but in this last election cycle in November, we actually just elected a woman by the name of Patrice Hutchison, who is the first active school counselor to serve on the board. And mind you, in Atlanta, a year before I ran, it was against our charter for an active educator employed by any school district in the state of Georgia to serve on our school board, which meant for 2 years, I had to lobby at our state house to get the charter changed to allow for me to remain in position or anyone to remain in position and serve on the board. Structurally, many times we are barred as education professionals from even serving on board. So in the places where we see these policies, we have a responsibility to do the work to open the door so that the right professionals are in position to add value to the system that so desperately needs it.
I love that. And, I would say, I was telling Jarvis, my vision for education is really rooted in what I want my daughter's experience to be. Um, I want her to like walk into a space where she feels appreciated, where she feels like she can fail, where she doesn't believe that some test is the end all be all, where someone is really paying attention to how she expresses herself. Um, People who just see the value in our kids. My vision for education is that half of the teaching force would be Black because our kids are the ones who are in the system. My vision for education is also that honestly, whatever systems are not providing, the community would step back in like we used to do and provide that ourselves outside of school. Because I think that we've forgotten as a people that we set the standard. Um, the federal government didn't provide free breakfast until the Black Panthers provided free breakfast. And so I think that we just have to remember, like the Black Panthers had free clinics before Medicaid was a thing. And so I think that we have to remember that we have everything that we need. And we have to face the reality that this system is not set up for us to win. And that's when the systems outside have to be stronger. And so if we just really sit and think about what we want the experience of our own children to be, whether we can afford it or not, whether we can access it or not, and then we consider what is the value that I can bring to this thing, and then we just go do it and bring the thing, my vision would be realized because it's really just that we would have a collective again, a community of people pouring into our children so that they can be everything God destined and intended them to be. But we kind of lay down on the job and we expect systems to do for us what we can very much do for ourselves. And that's not a cop out because I'm gonna stay in these systems and keep on working. But I'm just saying, when the cavalry doesn't come, we have to be there for each other and our kids.
And with those extremely inspirational, impactful words from all three of you, just thank you all so much. Such a great conversation today. Certainly, it's going to resonate with me for quite some time. As those seeing in the chat as well will resonate with so many of our attendees as well. A couple housekeeping notes as in addition for all of you all in the chat and who are on this call. Again, thank you for your time. We will send out a key takeaways document as well as a recording of this great conversation. So if you have colleagues who were not able to make it, if you want to go back and listen to it again, you'll get the recording as well as a key takeaways document, which will have some pertinent talk points as well as any resources or research that's been mentioned today. So you'll have all that in one document in the next 2 weeks. Additionally, we have 2 upcoming webinars, so please follow the Hunt Institute on all social media, LinkedIn. We're also on Instagram and X as well. 2 for announcements on our next 2 webinars. We have one next Monday around early childhood, early learning, around a new national child care finder tool that helps parents and families find quality childcare in their local states across all 50 states. So that's going to be a really compelling conversation. And another I'm really looking forward to, and I think a lot of y'all on this call will be interested in, on February the 11th, we have a webinar focused on our higher education, specific on the hidden cost of college, tackling basic insecurity needs on campus, which we know ties into this conversation as we look at schools of education and who's struggling to persist through those programs. So again, thank you all so much. Feel free to reach out to us. I'll leave this webinar open for a few seconds after this so you can pass along any information. But please reach out to our panelists as well as to the Hunt Institute if you have any questions or any follow-up that you want done. Again, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And to all our panelists, we really appreciate it. Thank you all so much for all the work you do in the community and that you're doing for our country. Thank you all so much.